of the topic. Okay. As you can see, my colleague, which is responsible for the logistical aspect of this webinar, has started the recording. And I think that's the first and foremost important part of this webinar, that I would like all of you to know that this is being recorded. And if you are uncomfortable with that, please just make your identity or hide your identity. You can change your name and change your profile photo while then still participating anonymously to a certain extent on this webinar and in this webinar, but just so that you know that this will be recorded. If you see in the chat box, there is a few important messages or important things to discuss. This webinar will be recorded. Please leave all Q&As for the end. You're welcome to put it in the chat box to everyone. Alternatively, you can address the question specifically to my colleague, Jean-Rie Potgieter, or to myself, Karen Pretorius, and we will then address all of the questions at the end. Please mute yourself during the presentation, and yes, then you can also please send your name, surname, and email in the chat if you are comfortable with that. With regards to if you would rather want to stay anonymous, you are more than welcome. Good. So then I would just like to take another opportunity and welcome all of you to this webinar and this presentation. I think presentation is a very formal word, and I would want to rather do it in a more informal way. I know that this is an extremely sensitive topic, and that's why I understand that as we go through the following things and as we discuss the different aspects to suicide and suicidality among ourselves, among our loved ones, in our society, I think it's important to be aware of the sensitivity of the nature. But I think it is so important that we do address this. I think for a long time, it's something that we have not spoken openly about because there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of emotions regarding suicide. And I think that's why I'm so glad that we are now at the point where we have the opportunity, the amazing opportunity, to host webinars and to have discussions regarding suicide. So if you do feel as we go on through the webinar that you may feel a bit emotional or just a bit as if there's something within you triggered, that is totally understandable. None of us is not affected by a tough and sensitive topic as suicide, but at the end you'll see that there will be referral options made available, and if you do feel that you need to talk to a professional, all of that information will be given at the end. Okay, as I said, I'm Karen Pretorius. I'm a registered counseling psychologist at the Student Counseling and Development Center, specifically then at Building Tuso. Before we get into the do's and don'ts and the things regarding suicide, I want us to just take a moment and reflect. I know this is not easy to do, but I want you to really take this opportunity, take this hour and a half that we will be spending together this afternoon and really make use of it on a personal level. That's why throughout the webinar, I'm going to offer opportunities as this one to reflect, but I want us to somehow right from the start do this, and I want you to think about your own life. So where you are, just take a deep breath. You can even close your eyes if you want to. And just take a moment and think about your own life. The 19, 20, 21, 23 years that you've been on this earth. All of us have gone through or experienced difficult things throughout our lives. And which suicide might be one of them. Either being personally affected, so having gone through a time where you had suicidal thoughts or even had suicidal attempts, or losing a loved one to suicide, or having a friend going through this, being in a suicidal space of mind. So I want you to think about what comes to mind when you hear the word suicide. Just answer this question for yourself. I don't want us to share this in the group. I just want you to share with yourself, by yourself. You can even write it down if you want to. Does this thought hurt? Maybe you feel a certain extent of uneasiness, maybe in your gut, or maybe your chest feels a bit tighter, or your stomach feels as if it's in a knot. Maybe you even feel your breath increasing a bit, your heart racing increasing. This means that there's some sort of on some sort of emotional level, we are all being triggered when we think about suicide. And in broad terms, just the terminology, but also on a personal level, what suicide have meant for each one of us. The last question is a bit more difficult, but I want to impact how you have life. Does this impact how you live your life? The decisions that you make for yourself, the people that you engage with, how far you engage yourself in certain activities or areas of life. And then, if somewhere in your past there was a trauma relating to suicide, does the effects of that trauma impact how you live your life? Does it make you a bit more uncertain in certain areas of life, a bit more apprehensive? Does it make you feel vulnerable in some areas? I hope that all of us had a moment just to think about some of these reflective questions and think about our own lives. And as we go throughout the next few terminology and definitions and things of suicide, I want you to remember what you just spoke with yourself about regarding your own personal experience of suicide. Hopefully, we can learn about suicide, the terminology, the definitions thereof, but hopefully we can also start some of the healing processes in our own lives when it comes to some of the hurt or the trauma that suicide may have caused. If you're struggling right now, please remember that you matter. You are loved. This craziness won't last forever. It will end. Don't give up on that, and don't give up on yourself. I do understand that when we hear things like this, sometimes it feels as if it's not applicable to us. Sometimes it feels as if the impact of something so sensitive as suicide is more severe than a quote like this. However, I want you to hold on to this, even if it does not necessarily have much meaning for you now. I hope that throughout today, or even throughout the rest of this week, somewhere along the lines, this quote will find meaning and will have meaning and impact in your life. So I want us to just quickly think about what we will be doing today and what we will be discussing. First of all, I want us to know that today is an honest and open discussion with yourself, and where there is the possibility of that, to also be interactive in that regard. So the things that we will be discussing is what is suicide, the terminology, the definitions thereof. How many people think about suicide? Are we alone when we have suicidal thoughts? Or is there more people that struggles with something as severe as suicide? Then I think it's extremely important that we talk about the common myths, because that is really something that can cause more hurt in our own lives, or when we discuss something like suicide with one of our friends or one of our loved ones, to make sure that we do not fall victim to believing some of the myths that there is regarding suicide. Then why does someone consider suicide? What would lead someone to that extent and to that dark place in their life where they feel as if suicide is the only option out? How does someone look that is suicidal? What is the things that we need to look out for? Is there a difference between self-harming and suicidality? Then, number 7, how can I help my suicidal friend? So a few tools, techniques, what can you do to make sure that you help your friend or assist your friend or loved one as best as possible when they reach out regarding suicide? And then how do I take care of my own mental health? How do I make sure that I take care of my mental health as best as possible, not to get to that place where suicide or suicidal thoughts clouds our mind? And then last of all, but very importantly, counseling services and academic support services. So where can we reach out to? Where are the places that I can contact when I feel that this load and this heaviness with regards to suicide that I'm carrying is too much for me to bear? So what is suicide? Suicide is when someone dies due to injury or harm caused by themselves with the intention to end their own life. So I think the two most important things is that this is when someone's life ends. And the second important thing is that it's with the intention to end their own lives. We will also today more focus on the intention part. So what do we do when someone reach out with regards to being suicidal, or when we feel suicidal ourselves? So with that last part of the sentence, the intention to end their own lives, we are going to focus on that today. A suicide attempt is when someone attempts to end their own life by causing themselves harm or injuring themselves, but they do not die as a result thereof. Suicidal ideation is when an individual contemplates ending their own life or make plans accordingly. So suicidal ideation would be when the thoughts of ending our own lives, of committing suicide, clouds our mind. So when there's a lot of thoughts in our mind with regards to suicide and wanting to end our own lives, the need to end our own lives, that would then be suicidal ideation. Okay. I know that some of these definitions may seem harsh and they may seem a bit tough and rough, and I do understand that. Especially because, as I said in the beginning as well, and I do want to emphasize this throughout today, that suicide is such a sensitive topic. It's something that can cause extreme hurt. And I am sensitive about that, but I also do think that it's important that we speak openly and honestly about the different aspects of suicidality. Okay. Is this important to you? And with that, I mean suicidality, but also the precursors thereof, mental health, how we look at our mental health, how we look after ourselves, how we make sure that others look after them. And this is where I just want to take another pause. So when we think about mental health, what is the most important thing in your life? Who is the most important person in your life? We are all social beings and we are all people with emotions, but I also think it's important that we take a moment to not only focus on the dark and difficult things as suicidality, but also look towards the opposite end of what are the good things, what are the positive things in our life. And I want us to remember this as we go on throughout today once again, because I think it's important that when we think about the difficult things and the difficult aspects to suicidality, that we also remind ourselves of the opposite side of the spectrum to that, in order to make sure that we get to a place slowly but surely, as we learn more about suicide, suicidality, and the different aspects thereof, that we also focus on the good things in our life, even if it seems as if it's very, very small and very difficult to find. It's important for us to, throughout this afternoon, work towards the area in our lives where we realize and where we see and focus on the good things. If you could pick one thing to keep after everything else is gone, are you able to do that? And then the last question in bold, is your own mental health important enough to you? And with that, I mean, when you think about the good things in your life, when you think about the important people in your life, if you think about one thing that you can keep after everything else is gone, is your mental health at the top of that priority? If I reverse the questions and I would ask you now, if mental health was also a thing, would it be one of the things that you prioritize? Would it be one of the things at the top of your list that you would say, but my mental health is one of the things that's most important to me? And I include people in my life that contributes to a healthy mental health state. And I would do everything in my power to make sure that I work towards a place where I decrease my thoughts of suicidality or depression or anxiety, and move towards a place where I actively, on a daily basis, work on my own mental health. You are not alone. When we look about suicide, when we look at suicide, it's really, really something that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people in their own lives, and a lot of people contemplate it, a lot of people have suicidal attempts. And with this, I hope that there's a part of you that would know and realize that if you have struggled with some of these thoughts, if you know someone that has struggled with some of these thoughts, you are not alone. I hope that we can take hands and reach out in this regard to know that isolating ourselves is not necessarily in our best interest. And that's why I really am hopeful that the stigma about suicide will decrease, that we will get to a place where we talk about it openly. The World Health Organization estimates that 800,000 people commit suicide every year. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in teenagers in the 15 to 19 age group. This have increased recently to where there's certain research indicating that it could even be the second leading cause of death. In South Africa, there are 23 recorded suicides a day, and for every suicide, there are further 20 attempted suicides. South Africa has the 8th highest rate of suicide in the world. And I don't know about you guys, but when I read these statistics, I really get chills throughout my body. It just feels as if something is not right. There are a lot of people, a lot of us struggling to the extent of seeing suicide as our option out. Men were more likely to commit suicide than women globally, with South African men being 5 times more likely to do so than women. So research indicates that men commit suicide more successfully. However, women attempt more suicide. So women have more suicidal attempts, statistically speaking. 17 to 35% of college students have inflicted self-harmful or self-harming behaviors on themselves. There's an international study on mental illness among students, and I also always refer to this study because it really, really is of great concern to me. The research and the study included 234 institutions worldwide across 26 countries. They found that there were high rates of anxiety and depression among students. High rates meaning clinically significant. This is indicated as a problem or a challenge. 41% of respondents showed moderate to severe anxiety and 39% moderate to severe depression. They are 20 times more likely to commit suicide than the general population. So not only in South Africa are we seeing alarming rates of suicide, but also among our own students. Students in general are viewed to have more than 6 times the prevalence of mental illnesses found in studies of the general population. So a student might be at a 6 times higher risk than a person in the general population when it comes to developing or fulfilling the criteria for a mental illness. In South Africa, UCT also did a very impactful study with regards to our students. They found that 12% of university students experience anything from moderate to severe symptoms of depression. So you'll see that it's much less than the international study that I quoted earlier, but it is still extremely high and it is still impactful. 15% report moderate to severe symptoms of anxiety. This means they are fulfilling all of the criterion in the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders that psychologists and healthcare practitioners use when they make a diagnosis, a psychiatric or psychological diagnosis. 24.5% of a large sample of South African students reported some form of suicidal ideation in the 2 weeks before they were interviewed. This means that a quarter of students may present with high suicidality at any given period. So just imagine if you were to walk down Lover's Lane. And if we have to simplify this, I know this is not at all how statistics work, but just for us to envision this, it means that 1 in every 4 students that you see, that you can count, may present with a high suicidal ideation, meaning that they are so at their own wits' end that they feel as if suicide is the last way out. This study then later on also mentioned that as from 2020, this has increased tremendously due to the pandemic. 2/3 of South Africans mention an increase in experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety due to the pandemic. So not only in general is there a lot of people struggling with suicidality and to the extent of being so low with regards to their own mood and emotions that they feel suicidal. But this has even increased further since the pandemic. You don't necessarily have to post, for those of you joining just now, you don't have to post your details. If you would want to stay anonymous, you are more than welcome. It was just one of the recommendations made right at the beginning when we gave out instructions. Okay. So let's see about debunking some of those common suicide myths. So these myths I found on the South African and Depression for South Africa Depression and Anxiety Group. They are an organization in the South African context that does amazing work when it comes to depression and anxiety. They have a 24/7 phone line that can be contacted. They also do a lot of proactive work when it comes to mental health disorders in general. So I found these myths to be extremely relevant, and I'm going to go through them. And the reason for this is that I do hope that if you find yourself believing one of these myths, that I hope there will be a certain debunking to that. But also, if you know a loved one, that you don't make the mistake of thinking that one of these myths may be true for a loved one going through a period where they have suicidal ideation. So when we look at myth number 1, people who talk about suicide won't really do it. In many cases, teens who have thoughts of suicide or who have died by suicide have given some kind of warning sign. And this is important for us to know what those warning signs are. And we will look at this a bit later on to look and be vigilant when it comes to some of the warning signs. But in most cases, when people are suicidal or when they do contemplate ending their own lives, there will be an indication. Sometimes it will be in what they say, sometimes it will be in reaching out, sometimes it will be as simple as posting something on social media. Sometimes it can even be a change in behavior. We will a bit later on look at in more depth into that. Myth number 2. Talking about suicide makes people more likely to kill themselves. I am so extremely happy to debunk this myth because in general effect, this is actually the opposite of what research indicates. Because of suicide and the fact that it's not a lot spoken about means that people won't necessarily reach out. But as soon as it's talked about and destigmatized, hopefully to a certain extent, it means that it might decrease the urge for someone to want to end their own lives. Not talking about it can lead to thoughts of suicide turning into actions. Talking about suicide and depression creates an opportunity to discuss feelings and thoughts that might have otherwise would have remained hidden. Okay. Myth number 3. People who attempt suicide are just trying to get attention. And once again, this is at all not the truth. All threats or mentions of suicide should be taken seriously and professional help is needed. Whether it's a suicidal attempt or whether it's a self-harming attempt, all of that it's severe and it needs to be treated sensitively and it needs to be treated with the necessary intervention that is required. When someone thinks that someone else might be just seeking for attention, it's always important for us to ask, but why is this person? Why may it seem as if they are seeking for attention? Because there's always a deeper reason to that as well. And that reason could include a whole lot of hurt or trauma. Myth number 4. Most suicide attempts occur without warning signs. The fact is, this relates to our myth number 1, but the fact is that most people who are suicidal or have died by suicide have given some sign, either physically or verbally. Once again, we will look into more depth a bit later on. Myth number 5. Only teens who are depressed attempt suicide. The fact of this is teens and children do not have to be clinically depressed to have feelings of harming themselves or feelings of suicide. Suicidality is a very complex feeling or a very complex behavior, and it's important to know that every individual that goes through that experiences it differently. The person who might feel suicidal, have suicidal thoughts, is never the same as the next person or another person that might also feel suicidal or have suicidal thoughts. Myth number 6. Only a certain type of person kills him or herself. Suicide does not discriminate based on gender, race, upbringing, education level, ethnicity, socioeconomic factors, or any other factor that you might be thinking of. While some factors do contribute to a higher risk for suicide and suicide attempts, all people are susceptible to having thoughts and feelings of suicide if faced with problems that they feel are too much or too big to deal with at that moment. Myth number 7, suicide is not preventable. I would like to believe that it is. As a psychologist, I strongly believe that it is preventable. People may think that if someone wants to end their life, nothing can be done to prevent it. This is untrue. By knowing how to identify warning signs and getting professional help, it can actually prevent suicide. People who die by suicide are selfish. And I think this is another extremely important thing for us to orientate our minds towards, especially if we have lost someone that we cared for deeply to suicide. I understand that sometimes we feel or view that person's actions as selfish. However, it's important to know that for that person to have come to that place where they feel as if suicide is the only way out, it must have been a very dark and very hurtful place. Typically, people do not die by suicide because they do not want to live. People die by suicide because they want to end their suffering and pain, that dark and hurtful place that I spoke about. They want to end that. They want to end the suffering. These individuals are suffering so deeply that they feel helpless and hopeless. Individuals who experience suicidal ideation do not do so by choice. They are not simply just thinking of themselves, but rather they are going through a very, very serious mental health symptom due to either mental illness or an extremely difficult life situation. So I hope that as we read through some of these myths, we can understand that there's a lot of untrue things that is believed about suicide. And I hope that we can be the ambassadors to debunk this and to, whenever we hear something that is not true about suicide, to rather try to say the opposite or state the facts regarding suicide, as that will also decrease some of the stigma that we do have. So when does someone consider suicide? It could be due to a number of reasons. We mentioned earlier that it's a mental health symptom, so it could be due to a severe mental health illness or just a symptom that is experienced to the extent of being so severe that someone would end their own lives. But it could also be due to something extremely traumatic that the person is struggling to deal with, something that they feel is causing them so much distress and discomfort at that moment that they cannot fathom going on with life because of this extremely difficult thing that they are experiencing. It could be due to a recent loss of a loved one or a job or an income. It could be due to major disappointment, failed exams, missed job promotions, changes in circumstances, adjustment to university, parental divorce, changes in friendship circles. It could be due to mental disorders, as I said. It could also be due to a physical illness or a physical medical illness that is so severe or that is causing the person to contemplate ending their own lives. Suicide of a family member, friend, or significant other, financial or legal challenges, and then also traumatic experiences, as I referred to earlier, including rape, assault, mugging, motor vehicle accidents, or any other type of trauma or traumatic experiences that a person might experience. But it's very, very important to know that it is not limited to this. For every individual, as I said earlier, Suicidality and the idea or contemplation of suicide is different, but also the reason for a person to find themselves in that situation is different. It is never the same as another person. How do we help friends? What do we look out for? So, what is the suicide warning signs? First of all, making suicide threats. How would a suicide threat sound like? It would be anything as subtle as someone saying that, I wish that I could just rest forever and ever and never wake up. Or I wish that the earth could just swallow me and never spit me out again. Or I wish that I could just disappear forever and ever. Or it could also be something along the lines of, no one would even notice when I'm not here anymore, or no one would come to my funeral when I die. Or it could be, I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to wake up tomorrow morning. Or it could even be more outright, as I want to end my own life, or I think about committing suicide. So it's important for us to also know that suicidal threats can be very subtle, but it can also be very clear and outright. As soon as we hear one of our loved ones making a suicidal threat, it's important for us to prompt or to probe and ask more clarifying questions. We need to know what this means. Sometimes we might feel as if this is a bit strange to ask more in detail, but in actual fact, this is how we save lives. This is how we get people the hope that they need when we ask more about suicide. For example, if someone says that, I am so tired, I wish that I could just rest and never wake up, then you can ask something along the lines of, I can hear that you are going through an extremely difficult time and that you are so tired that you would never want to wake up. Does this mean that you ever thought about taking action in order to rest and never wake up? Or have you ever thought about how it would be if life were just to end? Have you ever thought about ending your own life? And then, have you ever thought about suicide? And then asking more in-depth questions. It's important for us not to shy away when it comes to suicidal questions. We need to ask this, and we need to be open and honest about this. It can also be an indicating fact when someone has a very negative view of themselves, when someone has a sense of hopelessness or no hope for the future, when someone is isolating themselves or feeling extremely alone. It can also be that someone is suddenly very aggressive and irritable, where this is out of character. So it's also important to know that these things it's usually a change of behavior. So there's a change in behavior, there's a change in cognitions. So the words or the way in which someone would talk is different. And also there's a change in emotional expression and emotional experience that a person may feel, but then also the way in which they express their emotions. Possessing lethal means, so gathering the means in order to go through with the action plan that they have about ending their own lives. For example, going to the hardware store and buying a rope to maybe hang themselves with, or gathering enough medication in order to drink medication and in their own lives in that way. Feeling like a burden to others, where someone might feel as if they are always burdening on others, and they weigh heavy, and and as if they are a burden to others, and this may then also increase the feelings of depression and loneliness, and keep them from not wanting to necessarily always reach out. Drastic changes in mood and behavior. This is also important as it can be an indicating factor. So when someone's moods, emotions, and behaviors change. Frequently talking about death. So when someone brings up death a lot, wanting to end their own lives, or just talking about death in general. Self-harm, like cutting behaviors, cutting themselves, or other self-harming behaviors, which could also mean that a person, if this escalates to the extent of someone wanting to end their own lives. Engaging in risky behaviors. So, for example, binge drinking episodes, participating in unsafe sex behaviors. Risky behaviors could also include driving extremely fast without taking the necessary risk into account. The other thing that's also important to look at, or things to look out for, is when someone starts to get their affairs in order. So making funeral arrangements, writing letters to loved ones, telling them how much they meant to them, and saying goodbye, packing up some of their things, making financial arrangements, for example, ending subjects or going to the academic office and stopping some of your subjects because you know that you won't necessarily go through with your subjects or finish them, or something along those lines. Giving things away. When we do pack up our boxes, but then we give it away, or we give possessions away, things that means a lot to us, but has lost some of their worth due to the state of mind where we are in. And then also substance abuse can also be a warning sign. So someone tries to make some of the symptoms or the emotional experiences that they do have less by using a lot of substances, or by including substances within the plan of ending their own lives. How does someone look that is suicidal? So I have gone through that now, but I do just want to mention a few other things as well. And I'm going to talk about this in 3 clusters. So first of all, we're going to look at the behavioral side. So what types of behavior might someone display? The language, so this referring to the cognitions, the way the cognitive thoughts that a person might have, then coming out in the language that they use. And then also the mood. What is some of the emotions, feelings, moods that a person might display? So first of all, when we look at behavior, withdrawing, changes in behavior, changes in eating habits, changes in sleeping patterns, having no energy or decreased energy, being extremely agitated, giving away possessions, packing things up, getting affairs in order, drinking or substance use, previous suicide attempts, academic performance decreases, and then once again, self-harming behavior. What is some of the language that a person might use? As I said earlier as well, it could be something that someone posts online about death, or just mentioning online that they experience emotions and feelings that is so low that they think about ending their own lives. Talking about dying or wanting to die. Saying things like, I wish I wasn't here anymore. I wish I could disappear. No one would care when I am gone. I wish I could just take a break forever. Everyone would be better off if I am dead. These are all important things to take into account when we think that one of our loved ones might experience some suicidal ideation. Or even, it's important to ask ourselves these questions when we feel or when we think or contemplate suicide. Moods or emotions, a loss of interest in things that was previously enjoyed. isolating self from loved ones, not participating in activities that was previously enjoyed, anger, irritation, a low mood, so referring to a depressed mood, crying, anxiety and constant worrying, a sudden lack of worry, so either a person worrying or being very anxious, or the opposite of that, the sudden total decrease of anxiety or worry. And then also loss. If we look at the difference between self-harm and suicidality, self-harm is the deliberate action of causing physical harm to oneself and is a very dangerous sign of emotional distress. Suicidal individuals, on the other side, are experiencing severe life stresses and/or mental health disorders that are causing unbearable pain. Suicide is their way to end this pain. Suicide attempts usually come from a place of despair, a place of hopelessness, or a place of worthlessness. Individuals who self-harm do so as a way to cope with their feelings and stresses. For some, the pain from self-injury reassures them that they are still in fact alive, especially when they are experiencing emotional numbness or a disconnect from the world. The physical act of cutting or burning induces pain receptors in the body that triggers the brain to feel an adrenaline rush, which can easily become addictive and highly dangerous. So it's important to know the reason behind why someone is doing something. So self-harming behavior also is important to try to uncover what is the reason, what is the symptoms that someone is trying to mask by hurting themselves. For example, they mentioned just the numbness, wanting to feel again, or not knowing how to, on being unable to understand the emotional pain. So rather than to feel it on a physical manner, or it could also include a whole lot of other reasons. Suicide or the attempt to end one's own life is always with the intention or the need to end life, whereas self-harm might have a bit of a different or other reason behind it. It's also important to know that both of these aspects or both of these definitions can coexist. So someone might be suicidal and or experiencing self-harming symptoms or self-harming behavior. Self-harming behavior can also lead up to someone being at the place where they feel as if they would want to end their own lives. So what can we do if we know about someone that is suicidal or going through something like this? What can we do in order to help our friends? So first of all, let's look at the block here in the middle. Don't minimize or invalidate their feelings. Listen, really listen, and create a judgment-free space, thus a non-judgmental space. Be their advocate. Help them get help. Don't put yourself in the position when you are the professional help. Rather, be the facilitator. Helping your friend to get to a place where they find professional help is the best route to take. Ask them what they need from you and do that. Encourage self-care and taking care of basic needs. Spend time with them and be present. So spend time with them, but also be present and have active listening skills when you listen to your friend going through something as difficult as this. Let them know that they are not a burden to you. They are not a burden and you want to be there for them. Point them in the direction of helpful resources and then also help them create a crisis plan. This crisis plan would refer to when the feelings or the emotions or the urges of suicide increases to the point when it becomes overwhelming, help them to create a plan. Step 1 this, step 2 this, step 3 this. It's always also important to know that this needs to be a plan that works, and to maybe help them write it down. So write it down with a friend. A good plan that I always advise is, first of all, the acknowledgement of the emotion. So step 1, acknowledge what you are feeling right now. I am feeling suicidal to the extent of it being very distressful at this moment. So it's causing me a lot of hurt, and it's really difficult at this moment to deal with this. So that is the first step, acknowledge what you feel. The second step is reaching out. So with this, telephone numbers can be written down. The first 2 numbers that I want all of you to write down with your friend is the number of TUSO, our crisis line, which will be given at the end, but also the higher health toll-free number, which will also be given at the end, which is accessible 24/7. And if that number is phoned or called, it's a professional on the other end of that line that will be able to assist that person. The third step is go to a hospital, go to the nearest casualties or in the nearest emergency room, and find the doctor or the nurse when you admit yourself, or go with a friend to admit them, and tell them what you are currently experiencing. So that would be the top 3 steps that I would always advise someone to take. It can also be built out. So with the first step of acknowledging emotions, there can be different questions with regarding emotions. The second step, telephone numbers, you can include telephone numbers there. For example, the toll-free numbers that we have mentioned. You can always also include your own telephone number. It's just very important to never make promises that you will always be available, because that is a promise that you cannot always keep. So you can tell your friend or your loved one that you will be available as far as possible, but it's also important to know that we need to make alternatives for that moment, or for that days or periods where I might not be available. Okay. You can write down the other numbers of that person that that person trusts, which they would then also be able to contact. So a few more do's. What can we do? Be direct when we help. Be direct when asking about suicide. Accept the feelings. No feeling or no emotion that someone is experiencing is wrong. Be non-judgmental. Contact help. Always reflect what you are hearing or seeing. I can see that this is very difficult for you, and I am here for you now. Please note that last sentence, or that last reflective statement, I am here for you now, means that in this moment, I am here for you and I am giving you all of my attention, but I won't necessarily be always available. It could be a very, very, very difficult toll on you if you avail yourself on a permanent, or if you promise to be available permanently, because that's a task that none of us can ever fully fulfill. What is some of the don'ts? Let's pray about it. So that is very important for me, that we don't do that. Even though it might feel as if it's something good in the moment, it might cause a bit more hurt. It might cause a bit more distress. The reason for me saying this is that we never know what an individual experiences, or what they experienced leading up to them being at this dark place of contemplating suicide. And we never know if religion or spirituality might have also been part of that. It might not be part of the reason, but it could be part of some of the guilt that someone might experience with regards to suicide. So I think it is always a better idea, or the best idea, not to involve religion in a situation like this. Never make promises. Never make any promises. The one that I did spoke about is regarding always being available. Another one that we try to, or that we sometimes also mention, is I promise that everything will be okay. It's not a promise that we can make because we don't know it. None of us know if it will ever be okay. That's why I also try to stay away from that sentence. Rather say something along the lines of, I can see that this is difficult for you now, and I am here for you now. Or remember, whenever you feel like this, as you do now or in the future again, there are people that will be able to help. Try to save them. We are not saviors. We are not angels that can save others. I would rather us use the word of facilitating. We are facilitators. If you are in the extremely privileged position of a friend telling you or that they feel suicidal, or describing the emotions that they do feel, remember that saving them is not in their best interest. They need to save themselves. And for that, you need to be a facilitator. You need to refer them and show them and be there for them, but never save them. Never say things like life can be worse or it is not that bad. Those two sentences might only just exasperate some of the emotions. Debate whether suicide is right or wrong, or whether feelings are good or bad. Never debate in this regard. Regardless of what your emotions or your opinions is about suicide, never give their opinion that suicide is wrong. If that person is at that place where they are so low, then I think it's more important just to be supportive rather than trying to convince them that it's wrong. Lecture on the value of life. This is also an important point to not to fall into. The reason for this is we don't know what the dynamics of this person's problems or thoughts are, what led to them at this moment experiencing some of these thoughts. So we don't know what their perception or connotation to current life or the value of life is. Never, ever dare him or her to do it. And never act shocked. This will put distance between you. And never, ever be sworn to secrecy. So if a friend tells you that they are telling you this now, but they want you to not tell anyone else, it's important that you tell them that you do understand that their needs is to keep this a secret. But unfortunately, you cannot agree to that because their life is too valuable for you. Okay. So how do you take care of your own mental health? It's important for us to look at the mental health and the different aspects to mental health and our own mental health as well. So the different aspects that we find when it comes to mental health, according to the well-being wheel, is a social well-being, spiritual well-being, emotional well-being, environmental well-being, financial well-being, academic, career, and physical well-being. So what does all of this refer to? Social well-being is your connectedness to the people around you, to friends and family. So spending time with people that you do enjoy spending time with. But it's important to find your own balance when it comes to social interactions. If you are an extrovert and you want to spend as much as possible time with people around you, then do that. But if you know that you get tired easily, make time for yourself as well. spiritual well-being. Regardless of what spirituality or religion you might follow, it's important to know that this is an important part of who you are. Make time for your own spirituality and your own religion. Emotional well-being. Make time for your own emotions. And I know this sounds weird, because how do we make time for our own emotions? If we don't do that, we tend to forget that it's important for us to also aim at cultivating positive emotions, and also to look at the negative emotions that we experience and try to understand why we are experiencing them. Environmental well-being. The environment has a very big impact on ourselves and who we are. That's why it's important to also spend time in nature as much as possible. Financial well-being, to budget, to work according to your budget, no matter how big or small your financial situation might look. It's important to feel that you are having a certain extent of control over your finances, even if you are struggling financially as well. Academic well-being, once again, control. You need to feel as if you are in control of your academic well-being, as if you are doing what you enjoy, and as if you are learning new things that you enjoy, but also that the academics that you are currently involved in, that you also know that there's a reason you are doing the things that you are doing. You are doing the tasks that you are doing, studying for the tests that you are, in order to write exams, in order to get your degree, in order to going over to the next aspect, to find a career that makes you happy and that fulfills you as much as possible. The other aspect to well-being is the physical well-being. We need to look after our physical and medical well-being and health as well. Just quickly, a bit more details regarding this. Spiritual well-being, this would refer to praying, meditation. Emotional well-being, emotional check-ins. What am I feeling, and what is the reason behind this? So every now and then, check in on your own emotions. Write it down. Keep a journal, keep a diary that you write your own emotions down. Know that no emotion is right or wrong, but it's important for us to be in touch with our emotions, to be able to reflect on it, and therefore also be able to regulate our own emotions. Furthermore, talk to someone about your emotions. If you feel as if your emotions is taking a heavy toll on you, talk to someone and reach out in that regard. Academic well-being, time management and study skills. Work consistently and per your schedule. Do what worked previously. So find the routine, find the schedule that worked best for you, and stick to that. Maximum 25 minutes on a task and 5 minutes break. This is in order to improve your or work optimally according to your brain waves or your neurological functioning. So for 25 minutes, study hard, then take a 5-minute break, taking yourself out of that current situation. It's, however, also important to not use this 5 minutes to check your screen or to watch TV, because blue lights is not necessarily in our best interest when we do study. Rather do something active. For example, take a walk around your apartment, or do skip rope or jumping rope for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever, just to get your heart rate increasing in order to make your brain as optimal as possible to gather the most academic information in that moment. After about 2 or 2.5 hours, that would mean that it would be about 4 or 5 sessions of this 25 minutes and 5 minutes break. Take a longer break, and remember, once again, no phones. Physical well-being, what works for you? What, with regards to your exercising, being active, but also medical, looking after your own health, what works for you? Eat healthy, exercise, And also distinguish between active and passive leisure. So passive leisure would be relaxing, for example, sitting outside drinking a cup of tea, or then sleeping as well. Active would be exercising, taking walks, taking jogs, going to the gym, or something along those lines. Career well-being, do I like what I do each day? If not, contact career counseling and guidance. Make sure that you are happy in what you are doing. Even though there is challenges, please also remember that no career is 100% good. There is challenges, but there is also positives to every career. Financial well-being, saving budgets. Am I effective in managing my finances? Do I feel in control of the finances that I have to manage? Environmental well-being, value the relationship between ourselves, our community, and our environment, and be involved in a community upliftment program. Lastly, but not least, social well-being. Avoid social isolation. So don't isolate yourself. Talk and reach out to your friends, to your loved ones. Make sure that you make time for the people that you love, but also make time for yourself. This is an empty emotional wheel that I want you to take a look at and try to fill in the gaps. After this webinar, I want you to think about the different aspects to this and fill in the gaps. Fill in what works for you, what do you need to improve on, and what are you doing enough of. Stress management and how do I deal with stress. How to deal with stress. Visualization is a relaxation technique. Imagine your most relaxed space. Think about all of the details of that place, and then you focus on the sensory experience of that moment. So think about all of the different aspects of that. Just in order to create a 5-minute or a 10-minute break, sensory and cognitive break for yourself. If we look at the paced breathing, this is also an extremely effective way in order for us to just regulate our own emotions and make sure that we are managing our stress as best as possible. When we do paced or deep breathing exercises, remember that it's in through the nose, keep it in for 2 seconds, and then out through the mouth. Do that for 10 times, then 2 in, keep it in for 2 seconds, and then out through the mouth. And then you can repeat that also for 10 times. Then you can go over to the 3 in, hold it in for 2 or 3 seconds, 3 breaths out. Also repeat that for 10 seconds. And then if you're up for it, you can go to the 4 in, 4 breaths in, hold it in for 2 or 3 seconds, and then 4 breaths out. Mindfulness technique. Focus on 5 things that you can see. Where you are, you can do this technique any place, anywhere. It's a grounding mindfulness technique by incorporating your senses. So firstly, you start with 5 things that you can see. Then you focus on 5 things that you can hear, while still remembering the 5 things that you have seen. Going to what you are hearing, then you progress to your next sense. Smell. What are 5 things that you can smell? Then you focus on 5 things that you can feel, while you still keep the other things that you have also focused on in your mind. Lastly, usually the most difficult sensory experience for us, focus on the 5 things that you can taste. So for example, if you had coffee this morning with a breakfast, or what you had for lunch, what's some of those things that you can still taste in your mouth? Another very important, effective way in order for us to regulate our own emotions is by writing it out. So I also referred earlier to keeping a diary, keeping a journal. This is extremely, extremely important for our mental health and well-being. It increases blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, and it decreases blood flow to the limbic system. Limbic system is where our emotions are generated, and the prefrontal cortex is where our problem solving and thinking are generated. So our higher order thinking and planning, coming up with steps we need to follow. So if we use that part of the brain, it means that we are literally working through some of our emotions on a subconscious level. There's another infographic that I found very effective that we can also just quickly look at with regards to how can we deal with our own stress. Go on a digital smartphone detox, read a book, or engage in a creative activity. This is extremely important. Creativity is very, very important for our mental health. Build up healthy habits, eat healthy foods, exercise, and get your sleep back in control. It's also very important. Restore mindfully, so providing yourself the space and time to revitalize and re-energize. Focus on your senses a few minutes a day, as the mindfulness technique that I just explained. Spend time outside and take more baths. Let hormones go crazy, so the good type of hormones. Dance like no one is watching. That tends to increase our hormones that makes us feel good. Laugh your head off. Laughter releases hormones known to reduce stress, boost immunity, and strengthen social interactions. And then also when we spend time with animals, pet your pet, it increases level of stress-reducing hormone oxytocin and decreases stress hormone cortisol. One last technique that we can also just think about is the GLAD technique. The GLAD technique can help you or your loved one find meaning if you're struggling to do so. For each of the letters listed below, write down one moment or occurrence per day that corresponds with the instruction. Do this a specific day, for a specific day or week. First of all, grateful with a G, such as being alive, a friend, being able to study. What are the things that you are grateful for? L, learned. What is something that you learned in class that is good for you and that provides you with a new skill? Achieved, such as washing the dishes, went to your 8 a.m. class, finished an assignment. And then last but not least, D, delight, such as coffee with a friend, a funny movie, or walking down Lover's Lane. What was a moment that you experienced delight, or in general, just happiness? In this way, we try to change our lens at which we look at the world and try to incorporate a more positive view on life and remind ourselves of the positive things that we do have available to in ourselves. Now I would want to just thank all of you so much for listening to all of the details. I know that there is a few questions, so I'm going to address that, and then you are also more than welcome to ask any questions. Okay.